Good afternoon and welcome to this joint committee meeting of the Hawke's Bay Civil Defence Emergency Management Group. Today I am the Deputy Chair and will be chairing the beginning of this meeting. Welcome to our live streamed meeting. I'm going to start with a karakia. Let us pray. Whakataka hau ki te uru, whakataka hau ki te tonga. Kia mākina kina ki uta, kia mātaratara ki tai. E hi aki ana te atakura, he tio, he huka, he hauhu, ti hei mauri ora. Thank you. So this afternoon, welcome to everybody. We've got a full complement, no apologies. The first thing that we need to do is actually to go back to some minutes from previous committee meetings that need to be confirmed, which are from the 22nd of March and the 28th of June. Are there any questions about the previous minutes? No, the recommendations are that the minutes of the Hawke's Bay Civil Defence Emergency Management Group Joint Committee meeting held on Monday 22nd of March 2021, a copy having been circulated prior to the meeting, were taken as read and confirmed as a true and correct record, and the same for Monday the 28th of June 2021. Can I have a mover for both of those together, please? Mayor Sandra and seconded Mayor Craig. Any further discussion? All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against? Carried. Further actions that have come out of previous minutes on page 5 of the agenda are all ongoing, and some of which are covered today. Are there any other minor items to include on the agenda today? No. Any conflict of interest declarations? No. Well, then that hopefully takes us to our first item of business, being election of the chair of the Hawke's Bay Civil Defence Emergency Management Group Joint Committee, with the resignation of our previous chair being Chair Rex Graham from the Regional Council. We welcome the new chair of the Regional Council, Rick Barker. Welcome to the group. And we have a process here under our standing orders for how chair is elected, and so I'm going to hand to the group controller Ian McDonald, who is going to call for nominations for this. And in fact, before he even calls for it, I'm going to nominate that Rick Barker is the chair of the Civil Defence Committee. Can I have a seconder, please? Mayor Sandra. Mayor Sandra, thank you. I probably can't ask for further nominations. That's probably you, Ian.
Yeah, are there any further nominations? Doesn't seem that there are, Your Worship. So my suggestion would be that you don't need to vote, and that you just confirm the appointment of Chairperson Barker to the role of chair, and then hand the meeting over to him.
I might call. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against, and that is carried. Thank you. Congratulations, Rick.
Oh, thank you. It's as well run as a election to the Politburo of the Supreme Soviets. Highly organised.
And I will hand the meeting to you.
Sure, thank you. Chaos will descend from now. We've got, did you do call for minor items? Did, okay. Now we've got the amendments to the Hawke's Bay CDM Group Plan Controller appointments. And there's one nomination here. Don't think there's any controversy about this. So you're quite happy to have resigned, Kit, here? All right. Mayor Craig, you're okay with all of this? All right. Well, someone move. I think the
I'll move.
Who was that, Craig?
Yeah.
Seconded.
Second.
Alex. All those in favour say aye. I'll raise a thumb.
I was just going to say, Rick, 100% Mike will be a top man for the job.
Well, he's got a very strong CV. I noticed the first thing he put up was born and bred in Wairoa. I said, what's with that?
Well, I'll say no more. Rex used to always say he had lived in Wairoa for about 2 weeks.
Good. Okay. Now, what's the next item? Hazard events, independent operational review. Is this for you to lead this, Ian?
Yes, although Lisa Pierce has got the presentation. So look, we just, obviously the paper stands on its own merit, but we've obviously had 2 workshops with the Regional Council and with Napier City Council. So we've got the presentations, we've cut them down a bit, but if we can start that, and then at the end, if there's any questions of the 2 reports. There has been an amendment to both of the reports. I sent out an amended report to you on Friday, so you should have the most up-to-date reports. The first thing we're going to go with, the first report that we'll go through will be through the hazard report, which will be led by Lisa and Craig. And then we'll go on to the operational review and by FENS, and I see that Trevor Brown is on the conference. So Trevor will give you an overview of his report. So on that note, I will hand over to Lisa.
Thanks, Ian, and afternoon, everybody. Okay, so basically, following the Napier flood, we decided it would be a good idea to do a hazard event report. This report is intended to provide a good event record. The aim is to basically identify what the causes and the consequences of the event are, and to provide that information primarily for future research and to sort of better understand our risks, etc. It's based on the National Emergency Management Agency template for consistent hazard reporting, and it's not intended as a review of the response or the coordination itself, and so there was a separate review on that, which Trevor Brown will speak to later. It was commissioned by the Civil Defence Group and also the Regional Council, and it includes input from the Regional Council, Napier City Council, FENS, St John's, MSD, MOE and EQC as well. Okay, so the key facts that we sort of found in doing the event report was that the majority of the rainfall occurred in a 6-hour period from about 2 p.m. to 8 p.m. There was over 250 millimetres recorded at Nelson Park, and over 200 mils of that was recorded between 2 and 8 p.m. It impacted most of Napier, and worst affected areas were Napier South, Maranui and Purumai. And you can sort of see from this radar image that high intense red dot just over Napier there. In terms of what actually happened with the event, our first warning was received on the 8th of November, and it was 9:30 in the morning, and it identified areas north of Napier with falls of about 120 to 160 mil, but significantly they were sort of saying at that stage it would be in the ranges. It was updated again at 8:30 p.m. that night, and again they were reiterating it was north of Napier, including the Kaweka Range, and that heavy falls were expected on from Monday in the morning with intensities of 20 to 35 mil. So nothing to worry anyone at that stage. At the same time, there was a watch issued for south of Napier with periods of heavy rainfall with possible thunderstorms, with the rainfall amounts possibly reaching warning criteria. So that's what we knew on the 8th of November. Then on the 9th of November, the Met Service gave our duty manager a ring at 8:20 to advise the warning was sort of moving more south of Napier. Again, not on Napier, south of Napier. It wasn't clear if this was passed on, but nevertheless, regardless of that, we got a warning update at 10 o'clock in the morning, and that was sent out on the regional warning system to all our partner agencies. and the warning was for 100 to 130 millimetres of rain, again in the ranges, and 70 to 100 mil elsewhere, which is from a normal perspective. We get warnings like this quite reasonably regularly in Hawke's Bay, say 2 or 3 times a year. And so there was nothing sort of concerning to most of the staff at this point. We got another warning update at 4:11 p.m. and it was still identifying the ranges as the main area for impacts, with that 70 to 100 mils with further rain expected. But as seen in that rain radar image just earlier, the event itself actually delivered most of the rain across a large part of Hawke's Bay, but the intense rainfall was actually dumped straight over Napier City Council and centred over about 15 square kilometres. So Craig later on will tell you a little bit more about the rainfall itself and where it fell and how it fell. The drainage scheme performance, about 75% of the stormwater across Napier is pumped, and the scheme utilises roads as storage capacity. The rainfall intensities exceeded the design capacity of the network, and it performed to its design capability and as best as it could. There were some exceptions to do with debris, and there were a few power outages, etc. And so, yeah, some issues there. Additional pumping assets were utilised to remove water faster, and anecdotally it appears that a lot of the preparation and response activities of the Regional Council and the Napier City Council staff were sort of done in isolation from each other, and there didn't appear to be a sort of a joint plan for emergency management of the scheme. So the impacts were, in terms of social impacts, the majority of evacuations were self-evacuation, and that was really good to see from our perspective, because it was a surprise event, and so there wasn't much time to get warning out to residents, and so it was really good to see people taking that self-initiative and getting out of dangerous way. But consequently, the exact number of evacuations is unknown. The power was disrupted for several days due to asset damage, and at the peak there was over 3,300 homes affected with power cuts. There was over 600 properties that were visited post-flood, and 117 homes were uninhabitable following assessment, and 9 of these were actually on the Napier Hill. The impacts were actually potentially made worse with moving traffic, raising the flood level. So as people were sort of driving through the flood water, it would create a wake, and that wake then was consequently sort of causing damage to carpets and things in people's homes. There were also several schools and ECEs and community buildings damaged. In terms of the built and economic impacts, it's estimated that the insured losses of more than 87 million for property and vehicles. The majority of claims were for flood impacted properties, but a number were due to the land instabilities on the Napier Hill. The roading network on the Napier Hill was impacted by land instability issues, and it's estimated that there was about 2.8 million for repairs to roading and associated infrastructure like footpaths, etc. Some of the impact to the wastewater network was mostly on the Napier Hill itself, and stormwater infiltration into the wastewater network required the release of sewage into the Ahuriri estuary. So the conclusions of the report that it was a short duration but a high impact event. The rainfall warnings themselves gave little indication of what was to come, so it was a surprise. Determining accurate rainfall and flood levels is difficult, and again Craig will talk a bit more to this, and different methods can be used. The event far exceeded the design capability of the stormwater network, and the management of the drainage network for both Napier City Council and the Regional Council requires significant communication and integration to ensure it's operating as effectively as possible. And there is a scheme review underway. So there was a few recommendations in the report, which is not typical for these reports, but it was made in this case. So the warnings received from Met Service for the severe rainfall should be followed up with a phone call to the duty forecaster to clarify likely locations and potential intensities. The duty staff actually do that. That's one of their requirements to do. But in this case, as the rain was predicted in the hills and ranges, they thought it wasn't necessary. And yeah, so I can understand that. Alternative power supplies should be sought for all key flood pumping assets within the Napier City Council to ensure that any loss of power is minimal and doesn't adversely affect the performance of the drainage network. Napier City Council and the Regional Council should review the existing arrangements for management of flood scheme to ensure the most effective integration and coordination of the assets where possible, and I understand this is underway. And Hawke's Bay local authorities should utilise an independent organisation to review rainfall data. In this case, once we dived into doing the review of this event, we decided it was a good idea to actually commission NIWA to help us do an analysis, and that their findings are part of the report that will be published. So that's it from me. I'm just sort of thinking it's probably best to hand over to Craig straight away, and then if you've got questions for either of us, we can do questions at the end. So I'll stop sharing my screen and I'll hand over to Craig, and then he can present his presentation, which is complimentary.
Thank you, Lisa. Just confirming that we're sharing screen. You can see my screen, etc.
Yeah, we can see you and hear you fine.
Great, thank you. Thanks for allowing me to present this to you. So when just after the event, we probably got about 800 photographs from a variety of places, including air photos. And from this, we were able to put together a lot of the what happened here and there. And it was great because we could see flood levels, and we could go out and measure it afterwards, how deep it was. This one here just shows the effect of the wake coming from a car. That's was quite an impact in some areas. And the air photos that we got were generally from the next day. So they weren't necessarily at the peak of the flood, but they did give us a good indication. And then we used the Rainfall Radar. And as Lisa mentioned, we had NIWA do some statistical analysis for us. What I'm just going to give is just a little bit of an overview. I'm going to say that there was 2 floods that happened then from 3 o'clock and then onwards the next day. I'll talk a little bit about the return period, well, not that important, but and then some of the limitations of the rainfall records. Understanding the drainage in Napier, I think, is a good thing, that it gives you a good indication of why it happened as it did, how this can help with future developments, and then conclude. Now, just for reference, if I happen to mention flood level, that might be 1.75 meters, for example. That's a level above mean sea level. And for that flood level, you could easily have different depths of flooding. So I might say a depth of flooding half a meter or 1.75 meters or something like that, because the ground level varies. Now, when I talk about the different floods that happened, at first we had this short high intensity rainfall in the first couple of hours. During that time, the water level in the drains are still low. But there's so much rain that the capacity of the culverts are exceeded. Now, this is standard for almost all municipalities in New Zealand, that you would never build a network that took every single bit of rain. It would be far too expensive. So you allow a little bit of flooding in the roads and the low points. So that's what happened if you're driving down Kennedy Road or something, you sort of hit this bit of flooding in the roads. But because this rainfall had such a high volume in the next 3 to 6 hours, that exceeded the capacity of the pump stations or the drains. And that's how we ended up with this widespread flooding. And at that time, the size of this pipe just doesn't matter anymore, because all the water is coming from the sides of the drain, or it's not draining into if the pumps are working. Now, after we put all this together, we came up with flood level return periods. Now we don't want to focus on it, but it's more of just like, well, this is the stuff that we do, because as engineers, myself and the other engineers at Napier City Council, we need to work on this so that we can help design the system better. But anyways, we did come up with Like out in the Taredale area, Green Meadows and stuff, it probably was less than a 50-year. But as you came this way, where the rainfall was greater, it definitely was greater than 50-year as you came to here. We use the 50-year in this case because that's the level, that's the number in the Building Act that says whether houses should be at whatever level they are. We also talk about 100-year return periods and less and other things. So, and iterate here that the flood level return period is different from the rainfall return period. Now, the rainfall here, it definitely was a very severe event. So we have rainfall records for a few places around. Those are the little black dots there. And in in Nelson Park there, Napier, that 250 mils in 24 hours, very extreme. And with the most of that falling within 6 hours, that's very, very rare. So now the colored map under here, though, is actually the rainfall radar. This shows an example of the highest rainfall actually wasn't even collected by the rainfall gauges. This pink bit here is probably maybe 300 mils of rain. And that actually fell more a little bit down towards Awatoto or Te Estates there. And indeed, a lot of it actually fell out at sea. It didn't even hit the land. So this is one of the problems we have with rain gauges that actually don't represent the true rain that fell in the area. Now I've put this in to give an example of how how different this can be. This is rainfall on the on the side here, rainfall, and in the bottom here is duration, goes from minutes to hours to days. Now, if you look at world record rainfall, it follows about this line. And as engineers, we love when we can draw straight lines through things because that means we can extrapolate. But if you think about this, say the 1 hour, the peak 1 hour from somewhere in the world is around about 400 mils in 1 hour. Now the New Zealand record for the same thing follows about this line. And so the peak rainfall 1 hour is about 130 mils for somewhere. Most of the New Zealand records, incidentally, are down near Hokitika on the South Island. Now, if we bring that back to Napier, and we have our statistical curve of where about the 100-year rainfall is. Now, I've put it as a bit of a broad brush there because it does vary and depending on what sort of method you use. And then if we look at what happened at Nelson Park, and that's the only rain gauge that we have that was suitable here, there was 54 mils in an hour, and then there was about 101 mils in 2 hours, and so on, up to about 250. And these are individual spots these are the additions, like there's the 54 mils in 1 hour, or if you take these 2 hours or the 3 hours, etc. Sorry, wrong way. So from this, we can say it's easily seen that the 3, 6, and 12 hours are well beyond the 100-year rainfall return period for this area. Now we try and stick with like the 100-year. I don't want to focus on this, but anything beyond 100 years is hard to predict because the records are so short. So any event like this actually changes the statistics quite a lot. So you try not to dwell too much on that. Now, during that event, we did get reminded of the event in 1963 that happened. Sorry, that there was about 297 mils out at the airport during that day. And managed to find a photograph of somewhere in Pirmai at the same time. And in Pirmai, that flood level happened about the same in this event as well. Similar in Mariwa. So here's Barker Road along here, Mariwa School out this way, Whitmore Park. Now here's, the flood levels that happened between these two were similar. I'm sure this one in 2020 was greater. Now, the difference being though is so since 1963, there's been a lot of improvements to the drainage scheme, but there's also a lot more runoff now because of a lot more impervious area. So it's hard to compare them, but it certainly is that we can say that it's happened a few times similar to this. Now, something about rainfall statistics that I'm, because this is what I deal with all the time. In the 1963 event, we used that it's one of the significant events that we use in the way that we make these statistics. And just a reminder here too, rainfall records are based on this little 8-inch diameter recording. That's why that it's like, it doesn't necessarily represent the main rainfall that fell in an area. But anyways, because this event was used as in the statistics, the actual recorder that records this is a little, there's a little chart here that rotates. Sorry, where's my little thing here? This chart rotates and a pen moves up, and then as the tipping bucket tips out, the pen will knock down and move up and down as this rotates. And that's how the system works. It just rotates slowly. It's wound up by a little key. This is the actual chart from that day. And this chart was moving along this way. And the pen was then moving up as it recorded, and as it tipped out, it comes down, up and down. And the person marked on here the 0.2 inches of rain, and 1 inch of rain, 2 inches of rain. And they got to this point, and it's like, something happened here that was a little bit beyond the capacity of the recorder. So this is what we have to deal with when we're talking about rainfall records. Now, the recorder actually ended up getting submerged then. But nevertheless, someone did come up with an estimate of the rainfall of 11.7 inches or 297 mils. At the same time, over in Nelson Park, in this one, there was about 220 mils. So I put this here to remind everyone, rainfall records are only an estimate. And that's what we have to deal with. These days with electronic stuff, it is a lot different. You can, different type of recording systems. Here's another example, though, of why the statistics are hard to deal with. In 2004, we had quite a severe event. If you remember, there's this type of flooding in Tamatea. We called it the Tamatea rain bomb. And the rainfall records in here, right in the middle of this, we actually had two hydrologists. One was the head hydrologist, Larry Withy from Regional Council at the time, recorded about 177, 179 mils of rain in 3 hours. That was really, really severe. But these happen to be daily manual gauges, and they're not included in the statistics that make up how we determine what the 100-year rainfall is. That record was only 51 mils. So that's another reason why relying on rainfall records has some fallacies. Nevertheless, we look at rainfall records, and here is the maximum daily records from Nelson Park and other sources, just the airport, back from 1873 all the way up to 2020. And if we did take some sort of threshold here, say of about 150 mils of rain, there's actually about 15 events there that were above that probably caused some flooding in around Napier. Now it's changed so much from the earthquake, although the ground level's risen, the infrastructure put in, but definitely the two events there, 63 and 2020, were absolutely very severe events, and we should take note of them. Now, just something about the way New Zealand is, if you're a Dutch person moving here, it would have been close to home, because there's all these lagoons that were below the before the earthquake that made up of Napier. This would be where the Georges Drive drain is coming now. And now, if we look at it today, the yellow line here is the contour that shows it's 1 meter above sea level, and all the other colors are below sea level. So there's a big area in here that is subject to being quite low, and same over in Whitmore Park there. That's just the lay of the land. That's how it is. That's what we have to deal with. And it's no surprise then that the flood extents actually are in these areas, and that's what happens. Say for instance, in the county drain area, all of this water has to drain all the way down there. It's about 2.5 kilometers down to the county pump station and get pumped out. Oops, sorry, pumped out that way. There is an overflow that can come back this way down to the cross-country drain too. If we look at a cross-section through here, if you're standing on the motorway bridge and look all the way and take a cross-section through Piramai, Beach and Drain area, Maranui, Whitmore Park, and then out to sea, this is what it looks like. So from the motorway bridge, you're standing way up high. The actual peak of the bridge is about eight or so, but from there you look across to the Marine Parade, and that's that height as well. But everywhere in between there is you got all these low points, including like the inverts of the drains that are below sea level, and by the time they get to the pumping station, they're about 2 or 3 meters below sea level. Napier's got a really hard problem to keep this place dry. And you know, so here's this part of Piramai that a lot of it is actually just barely 0.5 meters above sea level. And indeed, the part here in this bit of rural land is only 0.25 meters above sea level. You come up to Riverbend Road, it's a little bit higher. Then you get to the point where in Mariwa, Maranui, that it's higher, but then you're left with the pipe network that has to come from this area into the plantation drain and convey that water away. And at the same time, the water from Whitmore Park is trying to get into partly into there and partway into here. And then when you come onto the other side of George's Drive, you have the area around McLean Park here, which also drains partly into here and partly in a pump station of Sail Street out to sea here. So you can see as this water is trying to drain into George's Drive a little bit, now this water gets held up as well. And it's all dependent on all these pumping stations, which takes the water all down this way, just George's Drive. But it has to come a long way down to the pumping stations to get out. Now, some good news, though, is that, say in Te Awa Estates, where incidentally the rainfall probably was the worst, but as far as I know, and hopefully I'm not corrected here, but I don't think any houses in Te Awa Estates were flooded. The pond filled up there. There probably was people worried about it, but luckily it flows into 2 pump stations, the Kenny Road, and then it can connect over into the cross-country drain. Now, the reason this worked, I think, is like 3 reasons. 1, there's a big pond. 2, there's pumps. And 3, the houses are actually high enough up at 1.5 meters elevation. That's the key thing. If any of those 3 were missing, we probably would have had damage there as well. And the same thing with McNaughton Place, which is it was a fairly recent subdivision that went in a few years ago. But I remember when we were looking at this and saying, look, if you're going to put something there, make sure it's high enough up. So this area here is actually at about elevation 1.7 meters. And indeed, there were no houses flooded there. So conclusion, rainfall was severe. Some areas of the city with rainfall return period greater than 100 years for a variety of durations. The flood level was less than 50 towards Taradale, but probably greater than 50 years from Piramai to Napier South. Less focus should be on the return period. The rainfall return periods are usually not the same as the flood level return period. People like me, engineers, and the guys I work with at Napier City Council, we do care about return periods, but it shouldn't be the main focus of this. Flooding like this has happened several times in the past 100 years. A lot of people remember it. They'll be saying, oh, this was similar to 63, 72, 74, 83, 89. So people remember this type of thing. The rainfall has also happened numerous times in a variety of places in the last 100 years. It actually happens quite often in Hawke's Bay, this type of rain. It just doesn't hit the rain gauges each time. From this, I think the rainfall statistics have changed because of this. We have to update our modeling and calibrate to this event. If we're talking about new housing, perhaps we should be using either minimum elevations of 1.5 and 2 meters. This might already be done. I have to check with building people about that. And Napier and HBRC continue working together on the stormwater network. And I think there's been good collaboration between our teams, and I think it's good to see, and I think we should continue that on. And that's it for me.
Thank you, Craig. Any questions of Craig and Lisa, before we move on to take the next presentation. Kirsten.
Yeah, just a couple of things I'd like to note in the report, and I'm referring to the executive summary here. There is a statement made in there that the performance of key assets being included in the review as one of the primary concerns or purposes of the review was the performance of key assets. However, the content of the report does not actually go into any analysis of the stormwater network or asset performance. So I don't think it's appropriate to include that statement in the executive summary. I don't know if you want to comment on that at all, or
Yeah.
Lisa or Ian?
Yeah, I'm actually just wondering if I should defer to James actually. Yeah, because we've had some offline discussion after the two workshop to the Regional Council and also the Napier City Council, and we have suggested a reword to those areas that you're discussing, and I understand James is going to put up a suggestion.
James.
Chair, I can, we do have some suggested wording, not to the executive summary as such, but there is a section in the report that directly relates to the stormwater and drainage scheme performance. So Her Worship's correct that the I guess the extensiveness of that summary and analysis is very high level. You've obviously got the summaries of the subcatchments and what happened in the report, and some very high level narrative. So with that in mind, we have some suggested wording to page 73 in your report, which is the section on stormwater performance. So Chair, if you wouldn't mind, I'd like to just share my screen.
You can share your pin number 2, please, James. Do both jobs at once.
So you can see that?
Yes, we can.
So the original wording is there, just reads that overall the drainage scheme performed to its design capability, and in some cases well beyond its capability. However, the short duration and intense magnitude of the rainfall exceeded the capacity of the system and resulted in ponding of water beyond that allowed for in roads and storage sites. What's proposed is replacing those two sentences with a statement here. The new wording added to that is highlighted. It highlights that the drainage system relies on pumping with roads acting as storage for stormwater. It's got a 1 in 10 year capacity for the pipe network, 1 in 50 year capacity for the drainage network, and that includes both the HBRC sections as well as the MCC section. Notes there that there was power supply and debris management issues at times during the event, but the drainage scheme performed to its design capability most of the time, and at times in some places beyond its capability. And then goes on to note that the short duration, intense magnitude of the rainfall had a return period in some parts of the city which is likely to be greater than 100 years and produced volumes of water that far exceeded the design capability of the system. So that's designed, I guess, to make an overall summary statement of the asset performance without going into all of the detail of that. So I'll stop sharing and just check whether or not that would be an acceptable remedy for the concern that's been raised.
Just give me a moment. I'm using one device here, and I just want to flick back to see the exact wording in the executive summary, because obviously that is what a lot of people, if they're just skim reading the report, will refer to, and that's where my primary concern laid and the expectations laid in that. So I won't be a moment. Yeah, I do just wonder whether we need to take another look at that particular paragraph in the executive summary as well.
who's the author of the report? Who has control over the words?
So it's myself, Craig Goodyear, Jim Tetlow, and Chris Dolly was the approval reviewer.
Well, I don't want to get tied up in knots writing a document here. It's beyond our capability, but I think the Mayor Wise makes a good suggestion that people read the executive summary. That's what they look at. Words that James has suggested are buried in the bottom of the report, in the middle of the report. Can we make some textual changes at the front end so that people get the right message?
Chair, if there's general comfort with the suggested wording, which I have discussed with the Chief Executive of the Napier City Council earlier today, in the body of the report, we'll reflect that up in the executive summary as well, just to make sure that that's symmetrical, and square that away with Napier City Council officers before finalising the report for publication.
Sure.
So in adopting, perhaps in noting and receiving the report today, it would be helpful if we just add to that when we come to that, Chair, subject to amendments agreed between officers of Napier City Council and Hawke's Bay Regional Council. But we can come back to that, given that there's still further presentation to go.
Yep. Okay.
I'm sorry, through the chair, I do just have one other comment with regards, and again, it's to the executive summary. So the report itself doesn't detail any findings or assess the co-management of the network, maximum capacity operations or issues resolutions in the network during the event. So the report doesn't cover off on those areas. Yet again, there's a conclusion made in the executive summary, essentially stating that these three things were an issue. And I think if I refer to Lisa's presentation today, she did in fact use the word anecdotal herself. So I think there, yes, acknowledging there has been some anecdotal evidence perhaps that these were issues, but to include a conclusion in the executive summary that basically says these were issues, again, I think we just need to have a little bit of a look at the wording around that.
Well, what are you looking for here, Kirsten?
So again, it's just within that executive summary. I think there's been some conclusions made, whereas the actual analysis to arrive at those conclusions isn't part of the report. It was simply referred to as being anecdotal evidence.
So back to the writers of the report, do you have other material outside of the report that's not in there that leads you to those conclusions? You can either include it to substantiate the conclusion, or where are we up to with this?
I think it's the points that Mayor Wise are making worth considering, and definitely, as James has suggested, we'll just have that discussion and amend those as appropriate. I think she's making some good points. It is based on anecdotal evidence, pretty strong anecdotal evidence, but it is just that. It's a high-level report. It's not as part of a scheme review. And yeah, so we can adjust that, and you know, as she's suggesting, I think it makes a lot of sense. Unless James got other comments.
Look, I just acknowledge the fact that the MOU between the Regional Council and Napier City Council that articulates the joint management arrangements around our joint assets is an aged document. I think from memory might be 30 years old or something like that. Chris, am I right on that?
Yep. So it was created in 1989 through the restructure of councils, that particular arrangement, and we've kicked off a review of that to make sure we're fit for the future, and that it makes sense, and there's the right accountability model behind how the responsibilities are structured. So
I think that that review is timely, just in light of the fact that what we find obviously in a significant flooding event is that there's stress on the whole system, and that puts an extra premium on coordination between the two councils that have shared assets operating in the space. So I think we can strengthen that existing document with the benefit of what we've learnt during this event, and also the observation that there isn't an emergency response plan at this stage for that joint network. So I think that's a factual statement that doesn't exist, and I think that's something we can bring into this review of the MOU and the management arrangements to ensure that that's all in place.
Well, do we? I'm a little bit unhappy about simply reviewing a 30-year-old MOU. I would personally prefer us to have a fresh look at the not only at the engineering, because it's going to have to do part of that, but if that's going to be the engineering is going to be part of it, that have what is the optimum structure for managing and controlling the system. Surely that's what we're up to do. If we've got a three-legged horse, why do we want to have a slightly better looking three-legged horse? We want one with four legs that runs, surely, don't we?
Sorry, Chair, we might have been ambiguous about the nature of that review. It's very much to ensure that the management arrangements are covered off. It's not just simply a matter of the engineering and the physical assets. Chris, do you want to comment?
Yes, I will comment. So look, it is a lot more than just brushing off the existing arrangements. It's actually looking at a number of different models, really looking at the accountability issue, and then looking at what's optimal from a variety of views, and then obviously take that recommendation back to both councils. It's probably also worth noting there's been a huge amount of work on the stormwater system from both organisations. I think Napier's done a huge review over the last 4 years, and the Regional Council has also kicked off a review of our Napier-Mearney scheme. And I know that there's been great collaboration with the models of those schemes, and we're working together to find the best solution for Napier.
Right. All right. Does that make you're okay with that, Kirsten?
Yeah, that sounds good. And before we move on, I would just like to take the opportunity to thank Craig for providing some further context and clarity around the return period conversation, because I think, you know, we all need to acknowledge that it's a far bigger picture that we have here with regards to these events, and the focus needs to be on the fact that with climate change we will be experiencing more of these, and rather than trying to, I think, put a label on them, we just need to focus on actually, you know, building resilience and improving our networks. So thank you, Craig, for taking the time to sort of put some further context around that for us.
Thank you. Appreciate the comments. I agree totally with you.
The question, Craig, those boots in the picture of that very aged old rain scale guy, were they your boots?
No.
Okay. All right. So we'll take the next report. Trevor.
Sure, everyone. Can you hear me all right? I'm having to work off my iPad.
Sure.
Yeah.
You
Can
good?
you hear me? Cool.
Yeah.
Good. Okay, so from our perspective, we were asked if we could facilitate an operational review, and the approach we took was simply to look at what worked well, what didn't go so well, and any suggestions we could have for improvement. And so throughout the report, there were 5 recommendations made that are captured in the executive summary. But overall, we made we identified 10 insights of areas that seemed to come up as a common themes as we went through the review. We looked at a range of reports in terms of our methodology, and we had the after action reviews done locally in Hawke's Bay. We facilitated a debrief with Ian's team in Hastings, looked at the recovery plan and the operating framework for Hawke's Bay, and looked at any of the other, we got a copy of the welfare response PowerPoint and any other things, the media reports or anything else like that. My overall summation is that we think it was a reasonably well-run, I don't say reasonably, a well-run event. And I think the issues that we identified are common. We've looked at a number of, we've done a number of these type of reviews, particularly for our own organisation, FENS, and there's nothing in this report that I wouldn't see in reviews we've done of this type of activity within FENS itself. It just seems to be a challenge we have across the emergency management sector. So the approach is very much a no blame. We're not looking to apportion who did what. It's just what are the areas that we could do a lot better. And I've always found in the past, if we start to try and apportion blame, and unfortunately when media get a hold of things, and there's a number of my reports they often do, they're looking for the little things that make sensationalism, but they aren't always the key parts of the report. So sometimes we just...
Oh.
So we made 10 main insights as we went through our report. The first one was related to the common operating platform, and that's simply having a system that everyone's linked into and uses jointly so that information can be easily shared amongst people and information isn't lost. If you're not careful, particularly for the incident controller, it can be quite a challenge trying to keep their eye over everything if he's not seeing not only what the requests are, but they are being actioned, and having that common operating platform's going to help that. The next one was training. We discovered that Hawke's Bay had developed a training pathway, but what we found was that it didn't seem to be completely supported everywhere within Hawke's Bay in various agencies for various reasons, but it would probably fulfill the need that we identified in terms of making sure the people that are put into these roles know exactly what they need to do. And obviously a bit of practice, having an annual exercise for a start off would be quite useful, which really needs to be a multi-agency thing, not just a CDM one. We looked at fatigue management, and there's quite a bit. What they really highlighted was that this event came shortly after last year's COVID. There were a lot of people that were quite wary with the time they'd put into that. And then there was a little bit of resentment around people that did make themselves available, while others seemed to be just working from home. But overall, what we really saw was that people had been a bit wary, and that's understandable because some of the people clearly would have their own issues to deal with, as well as trying to help the community at large. The emergency management structure itself, and we talked about the just basically there's a plan in place for how it should operate. It didn't always appear to operate as it should, but in this event, what we saw was, because it was very localised in Napier, it would have been useful to start at the point of Napier and work outwards rather than, Ian was trying to get everything together working from Hastings, and it can be quite a challenge if you're not getting the whole picture. So what we're really looking at is making sure things join up. So if you get a localised event, it can be, if it was in Hastings, or it could be in Bayview, that you start to work closer to the scene and work out from there. So that was what we were really looking at there. But again, the point's very well made by me, is that every emergency in the first few hours is quite chaotic, and particularly for whoever's in charge. In this case, Ian as the incident controller, you're trying to get your head around all the issues that are out there, trying to put some structure in place, trying to deal with a whole lot of, there'll be a lot of people trying to get information, including the media. So it's about trying to make sure that we keep that in mind as we go through this. We feel that in Hawke's Bay, Hawke's Bay are privileged to have a lot of resources available at their fingertips, considering the size of the community, with the regional council, the 4 TAs. So we felt that there needs to be a closer tie-up with those groups, because we found, for example, some of the building inspection systems used in Napier are different to the ones used in Hastings when they're trying to do the same thing. So it's a matter of having a look at some of that, and including ourselves. Ken Cooper had asked for the urban search and rescue people to come in to do rapid disaster assessments. It's very important that the building team understand what they are and what they aren't, because really they're there to give the incident controller and the IMT an early insight into what it looks like out there where their key issues are, where they might be having problems with having to accommodate people outside of their own homes. The recovery function, it's a simple comment there, as we feel that the recovery should be appointed right at the beginning of setting up the IMT. And that way the community you start to get a good feel with the community, you get good links with them, and you can start that pathway even while the emergency is running, because the recovery function's pretty large and goes on for weeks and weeks and weeks. I know from our own perspective, and with Port Hills, we're still doing work on Port Hills all these years later, and no doubt we'll have the same thing with some of the other ones we look at as well. Pigeon Valley is another good example. So the recovery is something that doesn't just stop the minute the emergency appears to be over. Engaging iwi, and as we've said in our report, that was well done. What we're suggesting is that they're an early partner in the emergency management team, because they're going to play a critical role in particularly reaching out to those communities, but also being able to provide other resources, both feeding and accommodation through the MRIs, which can become very useful. And we saw the emergency management advisor role was a role that the person in it seemed to have confusion about where their responsibilities were. But again, the role is a huge one, and being a planning manager and an advisor, whether that was intended or not, isn't something that can be done jointly. The roles need to be able to be focused on what they're asked to be able to do. Communication, again, the key thing we observed was hugely, really good relationships throughout Hawke's Bay. People know each other, they know what their roles are, and there didn't seem to be a lot of ego captured in what was being done, but trying to make sure that the communications, it's clear where it's coming from. It seemed to be some of it early on was abdicated down through the fire station, because Ken had asked our own media team in. And what we're suggesting in our review is that if resources are stretched in Hawke's Bay, then it's obligated by fire and emergency to share that resource with you people as well, or any other team that needs it. The closer they work together, the better it's going to work. And that sort of then falls into the public information management, how that would operate day to day, so that we're getting the information out to the community. We found with issues like Port Hills is another good example. If we don't fill the gap early, people will fill it themselves, and it's not always the information you want out there. So the sooner we can start monitoring what's out there and getting information on the various platforms, the better it is. And then in conclusions, I said, again, we didn't see much in the way of what we'd call negative in there. I think people did a really good job to try and get their heads around what the issues were. Clearly, there wasn't a lot of negative media or community comment, which is always a good sign that things went relatively well. It was good that people had observed quite quickly that they needed to get moving rather than just wait for someone to come and tell them. But the other area we did identify is the facilities that were operating at Napier at the time probably weren't the best for trying to run an IMT of the scale that you might have needed there. So that would be something that probably the Napier group would want to have a look at to see if they can identify a better, excuse me, a better facility for that. And also but we did pick up that using the Kennedy Park was a really positive in terms of the welfare stuff for the community. So that was an excellent facility that did a really good job. It's just that there seemed to be a bit of early disconnect between welfare in Napier and welfare through the group. But once it was captured up, it came together quite well. So in a very short, sharp thing, that was really the findings of what we came up with. So just open for any questions.
Thanks, Trevor. Questions?
Silence was a stern reply. That's a good sign.
I know we've got Kirsten here. Kirsten's first batter up.
Thanks, Trevor. Really good. And I think, one of the key findings in this report that definitely resonates with me is around that need for some further clarity of roles and who does what. It was something that for me personally would have been very useful at the time to have a really clear understanding of what group was responsible for as opposed to our own IMT. And just to comment on, you said about having the group located in Napier. As far as I'm aware, that wasn't even considered as an option, and it certainly made it more difficult having them located in Hastings. So that I think is something that we definitely need to consider in any future events, because when you taught two key response groups are actually located in different cities, it definitely leads to some level of disconnect, and I think we need to have a think about how we can address that. So really, I guess just one quick question for you, Trevor, was I wasn't sure to what level within the various organisations you actually interview people. Did you discuss or interview anyone sort of optional levels, or was this predominantly a report based on more senior management interviews that you undertook?
No, we tried to pick out the people that we thought could give us some more insight after we'd done the initial review of the reports and the debriefs. So we did come over to Napier, and I know we met with the lady that was doing the advisor role, who's I think going off on maternity leave, and her your controller. We met with them as individual interviews as well. We didn't go into any depth because what we were trying to do was look at it from, I'd say, the strategic level. Overall, what did it look like? And I think the issues around staff training and that, I just got to say, it comes up for our organisation all the time as well, because you are reliant on the people that work for you to start filling those roles, and it can work Monday to Friday really well, but it doesn't work so well when it's, I've had these where I've had to set up on Christmas Eve, and it's really hard to find people. So we just need to give that some thought. But in fairness to the people, some felt they were in what they saw as leadership roles, but it wasn't their day-to-day job. And so we picked up a little bit of that as well. But generally it was more where because there weren't a lot of negatives here, Kirsten. It wasn't something that we thought it was a well-run event, but like it says at the beginning of the report, anyway, hindsight, look back, you can find things that might have gone better. And that was really the intent of it. So it was just to say, and I just take my hat off to the group for everybody being willing to have a good look at it. And we tried to make sure we kept away from FENS itself, because this is your report. And I have had a request since that media thing on stuff for a copy of the report from one of our people on the West Coast, but I've made it clear it belongs to Hawke's Bay, and it would have to go through someone like Ian. If they wanted that release, it's not our report, it's yours.
Yes, yeah, thank you for clarifying that, Trevor. So when we commissioned this report with the other councils, this was about a commitment to continuous learning, as it is with any of the reports that we have prepared after events such as this. So Trevor, with regards to your report, can you describe or just talk us through where to from here?
Well, from my perspective, my work's done. It's now yours to do with what you like with. When I always say, when recommendations are just that, they're not must-dos, they're recommendations. They were trying to highlight the key areas, but the insights themselves were those areas where we saw you would probably find for yourself things that you could do a lot better. So other than there's anything else you want from us, from my perspective, we've done the work we were asked to do. That's what we've come up with, and it's now yours. And if anyone wants it, they'd have to go through you guys. We don't, with our own reviews, we do publish them and they get IY aid and whatever, but this type of report just gets hidden away. It's only, as far as I'm concerned, you effectively contracted us to do that work for you, although it was done for free. That's a partner agency. And I always enjoy a visit to Hawke's Bay, so.
Yeah, we like those kind of reports. Thank you. And I mean, this is a public facing document that we have already released publicly, obviously. So we will be taking the recommendations that you've made alongside recommendations from the other reports and putting together and mapping out next steps for us here in Hawke's Bay. But thank you once again, Trevor. That's it from me.
Okay. Probably just one question from me. So if I get any media inquiries, I'll just direct them to Ian. So we wouldn't make any comment.
Yeah,
Or,
no, that's fine.
yeah.
Thanks, Trevor. Yep.
Yeah, cool. Okay then.
Any other questions of Trevor? I just want to say, Trevor, I thank you for your report. I don't enjoy reading these reports. I'd rather read something else, but it was a good report, well written. I felt at the end of it, I was better informed than when I started, which was helpful. I thought the recommendations you made were sensible. They fitted with other stuff we'd been doing before, so we've reinforced that. And with anything like this, you're quite right. Mistakes happen. Things don't go as well as they should do. Even the most highly polished professional teams like Manchester United and the All Blacks, the game doesn't always go according to what the case says. Just have to accept that and do it as best you can. So learn from that. And I thought it's really good. The problem we have with these sorts of reports is there are those around who wish to point and blame because humans do have a penchant for blood sports. But we're going to do our best to avoid that, just pick it up, learn the lessons and move forward and be better prepared for the next one.
Thank you, Rick. And I'll be happy to be invited back anytime because I always enjoy my visits back to Hawke's Bay.
Good on you, Trevor. Good to have you too.
Thank you very much. Excellent.
Thank you.
Okay, bye.
So it seems now that we've got two reports. Anybody want to have a discussion on both reports? Where to from here? I think we've basically done it, haven't we? Okay, so could someone move the recommendation subject to amendments agreed to between Napier City Council and Hawke's Bay Regional Council officers on the text? Someone move that. Alex, Kirsten. All right. All those in favour, raise a thumb, a hand, wave, do something. Good. Carried. Okay. Is there anything else on the agenda for today? We didn't have any minor items, did we? No. Are we done? Any general business?
We have an item from NEMA.
Oh, do we? I missed that.
Yes, so sorry if I can just jump in here briefly. So we have a standing item for NEMA if they have anything they want to pass on, and if there's any questions that the committee wishes to ask. Ian Wilson is online.
All right, verbal update from NEMA. I missed that. Sorry. Yes. I'll wait. Right.
No
NEMA,
problem. Thank you very much. Yeah, we'll just keep it short. As you'll be aware, obviously we're still in COVID. We are providing advice to you around the ability to claim back, I guess, some money in your response at this stage. That'll be given out later today and hopefully tomorrow in respect of iwi. But also pay to remember that we have the review of the the legislation for the civil defence, and that's due out early September, or sometime in the month of September, and there's only 2 months to feedback on that. But we will work with you and we'll arrange a workshop to get a bit of feedback on it. But that's about all at this stage.
So just clarify this, the proposal for, is it a draft review? Is it just an open sheet of paper? Give us your ideas, what's going to come out in September?
So originally we were just going to do a review of the Act, but when we started and the feedback from the groups, we've now decided to repeal it, and it's actually a completely new Act for us. So there'll be a lot of information, I guess, that's new. It's looking to separate the functions and the roles out of it, so it'll be quite clear and concise about what the powers and the acts are for this legislative review, and then the functions will come in perhaps into lower order acts and regulations.
Explain that.
So the powers for the controller and the group will sit there. However, if you look at the regulations of, I guess, what should be done with lifelines, that'll sit under regulations. But the provisions of legislation and the fact that a utility is a lifeline will sit in the Act. So it's going to be really streamlined about what your role and function is in the Act, but then what the roles will be sit in the regulations. I'm not saying that very well, am I?
No, I'm totally reluctant to do that.
So we're just trying to clarify the Act, Mr. Chair, and make sure that I guess your functions are moved out, but your roles sit within the Act. So the group understands what it's got to do, i.e. declare, have the group plan, and what the roles of the group are in respect of resilience, recovery, response. Now, how you actually put those in place will sit in regulations, and they can be made by, what we're proposing, that can be made by the CEO of NEMA, and they'll be perhaps able to be put in place a lot quicker than they are at the moment.
Well, if it's regulations, that's done by order and council. It's quicker than by statute, which is done, has to go through the parliamentary process. So all you're doing is shifting things from some things being by statute and some by regulation. That's not a restructure of civil offence. It's simply a restructuring how you make your changes.
Correct, yeah, we're not proposing a restructure of CDM at the moment. We're proposing a clarification of the Act and our roles and our functions.
Well, that's different. All right. All right, thank you. Anything else? Any questions of NEMA? Simpler ones, hopefully. Okay, now I said thank you for that. Appreciate that. And now we've got group managers verbal update. Ian, you're the next batter up.
Yeah, listen, obviously, normally I put a written paper in, but we've been busy with this current COVID response. I suppose the only thing that really you should be aware of is that we did complete our Tsunami Know Your Zone campaign and sent out something like 20,000 letters, I think it was, out to various properties that are within the tsunami evacuation zones. Just within the COVID response, and obviously we've got a meeting of the regional leadership group tonight, but we are, today we had 53 cases, new cases, so the COVID arrangements are in place in terms of our ability to respond and provide welfare support as the backup to central government agencies. We are maintaining our coordination meetings across the welfare coordination groups, all the welfare agencies, plus the emergency services and the council controllers themselves. We are looking at how we can start to de-escalate our response heading into sort of the future, and how we can sort of better structure ourselves in terms of using council staff and group office staff heading into next week. And that's really it from me. Thank you.
Any questions of Ian? Mayor Alex.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Ian, I just thought it would be helpful to get some clarity about why community groups and volunteer base in terms of welfare support for our community has not been escalated the way that it was in the lockdown last year. Why have our community groups been asked to just taiho?
Sure. So I think a couple of things. First of all, it's Delta, and there's a lot of concern about people out in the community and this being transmitted. The second thing is that a lot of work was done after the first response. And look, in reality, the reason why the CDM group stood up, and also with that, obviously the councils and a lot of community groups, was because a lot of central government agencies were overwhelmed. This time around, we're not, they've obviously done a lot of planning between then and now, and we're not seeing that. So that's really where it's at. The lead agency is also with health. It's not with civil defence, because there's been no state of emergency declared. So we are really off to the side, I suppose. Our role in this has been made very clear to us by central government, that we are really just the backstop to pick up if there's people that start to fall through the gaps. And at the moment, we're not seeing that.
Can I just say, I think Alex raises a very good question, and Ian and I have had this discussion already about it being a health-related matter and health running out. and therefore civil offences off to the side, I think this is having unforeseen and unintended consequences. And the fact that we're not seeing people in distress, in my view, doesn't mean to say that people aren't in distress. I just don't think we've got the same visibility because we're not as active as we were before. That's my sense of it. And I'm not disputing what you're advising as Ian. You're doing exactly as you've been told and exactly as the system's doing the job. But I think we have to ask some questions of the system further up the top, actually.
Yes, well, we are doing exactly as we're told, obviously. We are also working quite closely with our networks. So I wouldn't say that we're just sitting back. And so we are working with our networks. And if we do find issues, we are escalating them, as you point out.
Yeah. Okay, any other questions of Ian?
Yeah, I was going to say not only that, Mr. Chair, the number of calls that came into the CDM group last time are now being transferred to MSD, and they are actually dealing with them. They've had about 170% increase, and then they're transferring those over to the food banks in respect of how to supply and how to deliver. So while you're not doing it, we are actually seeing it though, and they're actually outlining it to the groups of what's going on, how it's going on.
So how are you getting the information on the request to then relay it on to MSD?
No, we don't get the requests. So we're actually advising people to ring MSD direct. They're triaging them. They deal with them. If they can't deal with them, then the CDM group would see them if they fall through the cracks. And at the moment, the BAU under MSD and Pacifica and iwi are picking up most of them at the moment.
But back to my question, so you say you're getting the requests. When requests come to you, you're referring them to MSD. How are you getting the requests?
No, we aren't getting the requests. The requests are going straight to MSD to triage.
MSD's getting direct. You don't.
Yes.
You only see them vicariously.
Yeah. When they report them back of how many they've had and what they've done with them. Yes.
Okay. Sandra?
Thank you, through you, Chair. I'm just interested to follow up a little bit on that. As we've just heard that people are being referred to MSD. MSD are telling us on Friday night they are being swamped. You're saying MSD are referring people to food banks. Food banks haven't received any funding. I'm just wondering how the food banks are faring, and given that they and Tihe Modi Order, where their funding's coming from. So I think this is a really unclear space for us to be in at the moment. I just think that we need some more information on, who's doing what and how we're doing it, because I know the food banks are that they just rely on people supporting them with funding. So it's unclear to me, this whole triage of MSD being the lead and no funding coming from anywhere to buy extra food.
Yes, sorry, if I could just help with that one.
Yes,
no,
thank you.
Yeah, MSD is actually funding the food banks. They actually received funding to specifically do that. So in Hawke's Bay, they have been doing that. But can I just suggest that if there are concerns like this, perhaps raise them at the RLG tonight, because MSD will be there, and she should be able to answer those questions.
Sure.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm conscious that we're getting close to 4 o'clock. Something's happening at 4 o'clock. Have we got any other questions before we move on? All right, I'll move that the verbal update from the group manager and NEMA be received. Someone second that. Sandra. All those in favour, give me some indication, wave a thumb or something. Finger, hand, 2 fingers. All right, carried. I think that's about it, is it? Or any other things need to do? No minor items? No general business. You've got all your messages, Ian?
Yes, thank you.
Good. All right. Okay, team, thank you very much for your time today. We've got some work to do. And thank you for the reports, Lisa and Craig. And Thank you for your time, and we'll talk to you later on in Zoom tonight. Ka kite.
Kia.